The rain in New York City doesn't just fall, it attacks. For Khloe Bennett, each icy drop felt like a tiny judgment, a reminder of her worn-out sneakers and the miles she still had to walk. Exhausted after a 12-hour shift, she was just another face in the crowd, a broke nursing student serving coffee to people who owned the world. She never noticed the man watching her from the back booth of the diner, the one whose net worth was greater than the GDP of a small country. He saw something in her that night, a resilience that mirrored a ghost from his past. And as she trudged home, soaked and invisible, she had no idea that her world was about to be shattered and rebuilt by the arrival of a single, gleaming black limousine. The hiss of the espresso machine was the soundtrack to Khloe Bennett's life. It was a constant angry sigh that punctuated the clatter of plates and the low hum of conversation at the North Star Diner, a relic of chrome and vinyl tucked away in a less-than-glamorous corner of Brooklyn. For Khloe, each hiss was a second of her life, evaporating another moment spent pouring coffee for strangers instead of studying for her pharmacology exam. Tonight the city was weeping. A relentless, bone-chilling August rain had been lashing the streets since noon, turning the asphalt into a black mirror that reflected the dreary neon-smeared sky. The diner was a small island of warmth and light in the deluge, but for Khloe, it was the final leg of a marathon she was losing. Her shift had started at 7 a.m., and now at 7 p.m., her feet were a dull, throbbing ache, a protest she could no longer ignore. Her nursing classes had been brutal this semester, and the only way to pay for them, and for her younger brother, Noah's mounting medical bills, was to take every extra shift old Mr. Henderson offered. "Bennett, table 4 needs a check," Henderson barked from behind the grill, his voice thick with the smell of fried onions. "On it," Khloe replied, her voice a practiced, cheerful mask that hid the sheer exhaustion weighing down her bones. Table 4 was a single man in a suit that cost more than her semester's tuition. He hadn't looked at the menu, just ordered a black coffee, and had been staring out the rain-streaked window for the past hour. There was an aura of stillness about him, a stark contrast to the frantic energy of the diner. His hands resting on the table were clean and steady, with a watch on his wrist that gleamed subtly even in the dim light. It was a Patek Philippe Khloe, noted with the detached observation of someone who saw wealth as an alien concept. She approached the table. "Here's your check, sir. Can I get you anything else?" The man turned his head slowly, and for the first time Khloe met his gaze. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a storm cloud, and they held an unnerving intensity. They weren't unkind, but they were analytical. He looked at her, truly looked not as a waitress, but as a person. He took in her slightly frayed uniform, the pen tucked behind her ear, the faint shadow of fatigue under her eyes. It made her uncomfortable. "No, thank you. This will be all," he said. His voice was deep and smooth, a low baritone that seemed to vibrate in the air. He placed 2 crisp $100 bills on top of the $6 check. Khloe blinked. "Sir, this is too much." "It's for the coffee," he said, his expression unreadable. "And for your time." Before she could protest further, he stood, grabbing a sleek black trench coat from the adjoining seat. He was taller than she'd realized, with a presence that seemed to shrink the small diner around him. Without another word, he walked to the door, the small bell above it jingling his departure into the storm. Khloe stood there, staring at the $200. It was more than she made in 2 days. It was grocery money. It was a fraction of what she owed for Noah's last prescription. A wave of suspicion and relief washed over her. People like him didn't just walk into the North Star Diner. An hour later, Her shift finally ended. The rain had intensified a torrential downpour that sent water gushing down the curbs. Her umbrella, a cheap $10 thing, had surrendered to the wind weeks ago. Khloe pulled her thin jacket tighter, tucked her worn nursing textbook into her tote bag, and braced herself for the 20-block walk to her tiny apartment. The subway was an option, but the $2.75 fare was a luxury she couldn't afford tonight. The $200 from the mysterious stranger was emergency money not to be wasted on comfort. As she stepped out, the cold rain hit her instantly, plastering her hair to her face and soaking through her thin jacket in seconds. The city lights blurred into a watercolor mess. Each step was a squelch, her worn-out sneakers offering no resistance to the puddles. Cars sped past, sending up tidal waves of grimy street water that splashed her legs. She was invisible, just another struggling soul in a city of millions. She didn't see the black sedan, a custom Bentley Mulsanne, parked across the street. She didn't see the figure in the back, shielded by tinted windows, watching her every step. Nathaniel Davenport watched as the girl from the diner hunched her shoulders against the wind and trudged on her head down a lone figure battling the elements. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she refused to break into a run, as if she were conserving every last ounce of energy. His driver, a stoic man named Arthur, glanced in the rearview mirror. "Shall we offer her a ride, Mr. Davenport?" Nathaniel remained silent for a long moment, his grey eyes tracking Khloe's retreating figure until she was just a speck in the rain-swept distance. A knot tightened in his chest, a familiar ache he hadn't felt in years. It was the resemblance, of course. Uncanny. But it was more than that. It was the look in her eyes back in the diner, not of despair, but of weary, defiant endurance. "No, Arthur," Nathaniel finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "Not like this. Find out who she is. I want her address, her name, everything." Arthur simply nodded. "Yes, sir." The Bentley pulled silently away from the curb, its engine a low purr that was swallowed by the storm. As it disappeared into the night, Khloe Bennett continued her long, wet walk home, completely unaware that she had just become the sole focus of one of the most powerful men in the world. She was thinking about her brother, about her exams, about the blessed moment she could finally peel off her soaked clothes and collapse into bed. She wasn't thinking about the future, because she had learned long ago that thinking too much about the future was a surefire way to break your own heart. The morning sun, weak and apologetic after the previous night's tempest, filtered through the grimy window of Khloe's fifth-floor walk-up. It illuminated a world of controlled chaos, stacks of medical textbooks on the floor, a second-hand laptop open on a wobbly card table that served as her desk, and a small framed photo on her nightstand of a smiling boy with bright eyes and a nasal cannula, her brother, Noah. The blare of a car horn, unusually loud and persistent, dragged her from a shallow, restless sleep. She groaned, pulling a thin pillow over her head. It was probably just another delivery truck blocking the narrow street. But the horn didn't stop. It was a single long, imperious blast, followed by another. A commotion started in the hallway. Her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a woman whose life revolved around gossip, and her pet parakeet was squawking. "What in heavens is that? Is the president in town?" Curiosity finally won out over exhaustion. Khloe swung her legs out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold linoleum. She padded to the window, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and peered down at the street below. And then she froze. It wasn't a delivery truck. Parked directly in front of her dilapidated apartment building, a stark slash of impossible wealth against a backdrop of urban decay, was a limousine. Not just any limousine. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, long and sleek and polished to a mirror, shine its black lacquer finish reflecting the crumbling brick facade of her building. It looked like a spaceship that had landed in the wrong universe. Neighbors were poking their heads out of windows. Mr. Chen from the corner bodega was standing on the sidewalk, wiping his hands on his apron, and staring. A small crowd was beginning to gather. Khloe's heart began to pound, a frantic, confused rhythm against her ribs. This had to be a mistake, a film shoot, a prank. Then the driver's door opened. A man in a perfectly tailored black suit and chauffeur's cap emerged. He was tall, with silvering hair at his temples, and an expression of polite indifference. It was Arthur, the man from the Bentley, though Khloe didn't know that. He walked with an unhurried grace to the passenger side, opened the rear door and stood at attention, his gaze directed squarely at the entrance of her building. He was waiting. For someone inside. For her, panic flared in Khloe's chest. She backed away from the window, her mind racing. Who, why? The only person she could think of was the man from the diner. The $200. It couldn't be. People like that didn't follow Waitress's home. A sharp knock on her apartment door made her jump. It was Mrs. Gable. "Khloe, dear, are you seeing this?" Her voice pierced the thin wood. "There's a man in a suit downstairs. He's asking for a Miss Khloe Bennett. Dear, did you win the lottery?" Khloe's mouth went dry. I don't know, Mrs. Gable." She was trembling now. This felt dangerous, surreal. Her life was about schedules and budgets and grades. It was predictable in its hardship. This was an anomaly, a tear in the fabric of her reality. She pulled on a pair of jeans and a faded sweatshirt, her hands shaking so badly she could barely zip the fly. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. The man in the suit, Arthur, was standing there. He was even more imposing up close. His eyes, a cool blue, assessed her quickly and professionally. "Miss Khloe Bennett?" he asked, his voice calm and respectful. "Yes," she squeaked. "Mr. Davenport has sent me to collect you. He requests a meeting at your earliest convenience." Marho, Mr. Davenport. The name meant nothing to her. "I think you have the wrong person. I don't know any Mr. Davenport." "He was at the North Star Diner last night," Arthur clarified, his expression unchanging. "He would be most grateful for a moment of your time. He assures you it is a matter of considerable importance." The man from the diner, the storm cloud eyes, the $200. It was him. 1,000 terrifying scenarios flooded Khloe's mind. Was he a criminal? Was she in some kind of trouble? "What does he want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It is not my place to say, miss," Arthur replied smoothly. "But I can assure you of your complete safety. The vehicle will return you here directly after the meeting." Khloe hesitated, her hand gripping the doorframe. Her instincts screamed at her to slam the door to hide. But another part of her, the part that was drowning in debt and desperation, was morbidly curious. What could a man who sends a Rolls-Royce possibly want with a girl who counts every penny for the subway? What if this was an opportunity? The thought was as intoxicating as it was terrifying. "Please, Miss Bennett," Arthur said, his tone softening slightly. "He is waiting." Making a split-second decision that felt like jumping off a cliff, Khloe nodded. "Okay, give me 5 minutes." She closed the door, her heart hammering. She splashed her face with cold water, brushed her teeth, and tied her messy hair back into a simple ponytail. She looked at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. It was just her. Just Khloe. What could she possibly have that a man like that would want? When she walked out of the building minutes later, the small crowd of neighbors fell silent. They stared as Arthur held the limousine door open for her. As she slid onto the plush leather seat, the scent of wealth a subtle mix of leather wood polish, and something faintly floral enveloped her. The door closed with a soft, expensive thud, sealing her off from the world she knew. The noise of the street vanished, replaced by an unnerving, insulated silence. The car pulled away from the curb as smoothly as a ship setting sail. Through the tinted window, she saw Mrs. Gable's jaw hanging open. Khloe Bennett, the broke waitress, was riding away in a limousine, and for the first time in a long time, she had absolutely no idea where she was going. The journey was a silent 20-minute glide through the city's arteries, a dream-like passage from the grit of Brooklyn to the glittering canyons of Manhattan. Khloe stared out the window, watching her world of bodegas and laundromats dissolve into a landscape of designer storefronts and towering glass skyscrapers. The limousine moved with an ethereal smoothness, utterly detached from the snarling traffic around it. Khloe felt like a specimen being transported in a sterile container. The car finally came to a stop, not in front of a building, but descending into a private underground garage. The security was immense, with guards and reinforced steel gates. Arthur escorted her to a private elevator, which ascended with dizzying, silent speed. There were no buttons. He simply used a keycard. The doors opened directly into a sprawling penthouse apartment. Khloe's breath caught in her throat. The space was immense, a cathedral of modern minimalism. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides offered a godlike panoramic view of Central Park and the city skyline. The furniture was sparse but exquisite, a sleek leather sofa, abstract sculptures, and a grand piano in the corner. The air was cool and still. It wasn't a home. It was a statement, a declaration of power. And there, standing by the window with his back to her, was the man from the diner, Nathaniel Davenport. He was dressed in a simple dark grey cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, yet he commanded the room entirely. He turned slowly as she entered. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice the same deep, calm tone she remembered. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." He gestured towards 2 chairs positioned like a chessboard in the center of the room. Khloe perched on the edge of one, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She felt utterly out of place, her worn jeans and sweatshirt a glaring stain on the pristine perfection of the room. "My name is Nathaniel Davenport," he began, taking the seat opposite her. He leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes focused on her with that same unnerving intensity. "I am the founder and CEO of Davenport Innovations." The name hit her like a physical blow. Davenport Innovations, the tech giant that was in the news constantly for its revolutionary work in AI and financial algorithms. Nathaniel Davenport wasn't just rich, he was a legend, a reclusive genius billionaire who was notoriously private, and he was sitting 3 feet away from her. "I'll be direct, Miss Bennett. I have a proposition for you. It is unconventional, and it will require a considerable degree of performance." Khloe swallowed hard. "A proposition. Yes. I want to hire you." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I want you to pose as my fiancé." The silence that followed was so profound, Khloe could hear the blood rushing in her ears. She stared at him, certain she had misheard. It was a line from a bad movie. It couldn't be real. Your fiancé," she stammered, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. Why me? You could have any woman in the world." "Precisely," he said, his expression unchanging. "Any woman in the world would be looking for something. They would be known. They would have ambitions tied to my name. You, Miss Bennett, are a blank slate. You are intelligent. I saw your textbook, Advanced Pathophysiology. You're a nursing student. You are hard-working, demonstrated by your double shifts. You are unconnected to my world, and most importantly, you are believable." His logic was cold precise, and utterly terrifying. He had summed up her entire existence in a few clinical sentences. "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "Why do you need a fake fiancé at all?" "I am in the final stages of a merger with a Japanese conglomerate, Tanaka Corporation. The deal is worth billions and is critical to the future of my company. Its patriarch, Mr. Kaito Tanaka, is a man of immense tradition. He values family stability and legacy above all else. He has made it clear, subtly, that he is hesitant to place the future of his family's company in the hands of a man he perceives as a solitary, unattached workaholic." "So you need a prop," Khloe said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "A decoration to make you look stable. A flicker of something. Was it respect passed through his eyes?" "A partner," he corrected smoothly. "A convincing one. For the next 2 months. That is all I require. We will attend a handful of dinners, a charity gala, and 1 weekend retreat at my estate. You will be coached. You will be dressed. You will be given a complete backstory. After the contracts are signed, we will announce a quiet, amicable separation. You will walk away, and no one will be the wiser." Khloe felt a surge of anger at his arrogance, his assumption that her life, her identity could be bought and molded to fit his needs. "And what makes you think I would ever agree to such a ridiculous, deceitful thing?" she asked, her voice trembling with indignation. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the glass table between them. "This is what makes me think you will agree." Her hands shaking, Khloe opened it. It was a contract, but the numbers inside made her vision swim. The payment offered was a single lump sum, deposited into an account of her choosing upon the successful completion of the 2-month term. The number was $5 million. Khloe's mind went blank. $5 million. It was an astronomical, incomprehensible figure. It was a number from another reality. It would pay for her tuition 100 times over. It would buy the house her parents always dreamed of. It would save Noah. As if reading her mind, Nathaniel spoke again, his voice softer now. "I took the liberty of looking into your circumstances, Miss Bennett. I am aware of your brother Noah's condition, cystic fibrosis. I am also aware that there is an experimental gene therapy treatment still in clinical trials that has shown remarkable promise. A treatment that is prohibitively expensive and nearly impossible to get access to." He pointed to a specific clause on the second page of the contract. Clause 7b. It stated that in addition to the financial compensation, Davenport Innovations would use its considerable resources and connections in the biotech world to secure Noah a place in that clinical trial at the prestigious Johns Hopkins Hospital, with all expenses covered indefinitely. That was the moment the floor fell out from under her. It wasn't about the money anymore. The $5 million was an abstract fantasy. But this was Noah's future. His breath, his life. He was offering her the one thing she would do anything for. He hadn't just found her weakness, he had weaponized her deepest love. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and angry. She felt trapped, manipulated. He had investigated her, dissected her life, and found the exact price for her soul. "You're a monster," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Nathaniel Davenport's face remained impassive, but his grey eyes held a new, somber depth. "I am a pragmatist, Miss Bennett. I see a problem and I find a solution. Your problem is your brother's health and your financial ruin. My problem is Mr. Tanaka's traditionalism. I am offering a transaction where we both solve our problems. It is nothing more, nothing less." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "The contract is yours to keep. Read it. Have a lawyer look at it if you wish. I'll even pay for it. Arthur will take you home. You have 24 hours to give me your answer." Khloe stood on shaky legs, clutching the leather-bound contract to her chest. It felt as heavy as a tombstone. She didn't say another word as Arthur escorted her back to the elevator, back to the silent limousine, back to the world of noise and struggle and rain. But as the car pulled away, she looked back up at the penthouse, a glass cage in the sky, and she knew. She knew there was no choice. He had bought her, and the price was her brother's life. The 24 hours that followed were a blur of torment. Khloe sat in her small apartment, the leather-bound contract lying on her card table like a malevolent artifact. The world outside her window continued as normal, the sounds of traffic, the chatter of people on the street, the distant wail of a siren. But inside her apartment, time had warped. Every tick of the clock was a countdown to a decision she felt was already made. She read the contract from cover to cover 3 times. It was drafted with the ruthless precision she would expect from a man like Nathaniel Davenport. Every contingency was covered. A strict non-disclosure agreement bound her to silence for life, with penalties so severe they made her stomach churn. There were clauses detailing conduct, public appearances, and even approved topics of conversation. It was a script for a new life, a life that wasn't hers. Then there was Clause 7B, the promise for Noah. It was written with the same cold legality, but the words shimmered with hope. Access to the VTR 551 gene therapy trial, all medical travel and accommodation expenses for both Noah and a guardian to be covered by a private trust. It was a miracle wrapped in a devil's bargain. She called her mother in Ohio. She didn't mention the contract, of course. She just asked about Noah. The conversation was heavy with a familiar, weary sadness. Noah had had a bad week, another respiratory infection, another visit to the local clinic that could do little more than prescribe antibiotics and offer sympathetic words. "The doctors here are doing their best, sweetie," her mother said, her voice strained. "But they say we need a specialist, a major center. We can't afford to even think about it." Each word was a nail in the coffin of Khloe's resistance. She hung up the phone, her hands trembling, and stared at the photo of her smiling brother. He was so young, his life a constant battle for every breath. How could she live with herself if she had the chance to give him a future, a real healthy future, and turned it down because of her own pride or fear? The $5 million was still a dizzying, unreal figure. But she started to break it down. It would pay off her parents' mortgage. It would set up a college fund for Noah. It would mean she could finish her nursing degree without working herself to the bone. It wasn't just money. It was freedom, an end to the relentless grinding pressure that had defined her entire adult life. But the cost was a lie, a deep, public, and intricate deception. She would have to look into the eyes of this Mr. Tanaka and pretend to love a man she barely knew, a man who saw her as a tool. She would have to smile and nod at parties wearing clothes that weren't her own in a world where she didn't belong. She, Khloe Bennett, who valued honesty and authenticity above all else, would have to become a phantom. An actress. That evening, as she heated up a can of soup for dinner, an eviction notice was slipped under her door. Her landlord, a portly man named Mr. Petrov, had finally lost his patience. She was 2 months behind on rent. The slip of pink paper was a stark, brutal reminder of her reality. She was 1 step away from being homeless. She looked from the eviction notice to the contract on the table. One represented her life, as it was a constant, desperate struggle against a tide that was pulling her under. The other represented an escape, but at what moral price? The image of Nathaniel Davenport's face swam in her mind. His cold grey eyes, his clinical assessment of her life. He wasn't offering her a fairy tale. He was offering her a transaction, plain and simple. He had been honest about his cynicism. Maybe in a world this cruel, a cynical transaction was the most honest thing there was. She spent the night sleepless, tossing and turning the clauses of the contract, battling with her conscience. By the time the sun rose, casting a pale grey light into her room, she was hollowed out. The fight was over. Desperation had won. Her phone buzzed at precisely 9:00 a.m. It was an unknown number. She knew who it was. She answered, her hand clammy. "Miss Bennet." It wasn't a question. It was Nathaniel Davenport. "Yes," she said, her voice raspy. "Have you reached a decision?" Khloe closed her eyes, picturing Noah's face. She took a deep breath. "Yes, I accept your offer." There was no triumph in his voice, no satisfaction, just a quiet finality. "Very good. Arthur will be at your residence in 1 hour to collect you and your belongings. We need to begin immediately." My belongings," Khloe stammered. "What do you mean?" "You will be moving into one of my properties for the duration of our arrangement," he stated. "It is necessary for appearances and for your training. Your current residence is no longer suitable. Pack a small bag with personal essentials. Everything else will be provided for you." He was erasing her life, piece by piece. He was taking her out of her world and transplanting her into his. Khloe felt a fresh wave of panic, but she choked it down. The deal was made. "I understand," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I will see you shortly, Miss Bennet," he said, and the line went dead. Khloe stood in the middle of her small apartment, a place that held all the struggles and small joys of her life for the past 3 years. She looked at her stacks of books, her faded quilt, the chipped coffee mug she used every morning. In 1 hour, it would all be gone. In 1 hour, Khloe Bennet, the waitress, would cease to exist. In her place would be a new creation, a woman designed to be the fiancée of a billionaire. She had sold her life for a chance to save her brothers. She just prayed she wouldn't lose herself completely in the process. The life Khloe had known was dismantled with swift, impersonal efficiency. Arthur arrived with 2 other men, who packed her few personal belongings, her textbooks, the photo of Noah, a handful of clothes into a single box. Mr. Petroff, the landlord, was met at the door by Arthur, who handed him an envelope. Khloe caught a glimpse of the cash inside, enough to cover her back rent, and several years more. The landlord's belligerence melted into stunned, obsequious gratitude. She was taken not to the penthouse, but to a magnificent brownstone on the Upper East Side. It was a Davenport property, a 4-story masterpiece of classic architecture and modern luxury that Nathaniel kept as a guest house. This, she was told, would be her home for the next 2 months. It was also to be her classroom and her prison. The next 2 weeks were a relentless crucible, designed to forge Khloe the waitress into Khloe the elegant and suitable fiancée of a titan of industry. A team of people descended upon her, each an expert in their field. There was a stylist named Antoine, a wiry man with a dramatic flair who declared her entire wardrobe a tragedy and replaced it with a curated collection of designer clothes, shoes, and jewelry that filled a walk-in closet larger than her old apartment. There was an etiquette coach, a stern older woman named Mrs. DeWitt, who taught her which fork to use, how to sit, how to walk, and how to make polite, meaningless conversation about art, wine, and polo. Khloe spent hours learning the family histories of New York's elite, the names of obscure artists, and the political leanings of Davenport Innovations board members. Her brain, accustomed to memorizing anatomical charts and drug interactions, was now being crammed with a different, more slippery kind of knowledge. Nathaniel was a constant, demanding presence. He was her director, her harshest critic. He would observe her lessons with Mrs. DeWitt, his arms crossed, his grey eyes missing nothing. "Your posture, Khloe," he would say, his voice cutting through the room. "You are not carrying a tray of coffee. Your shoulders should be back. You are projecting apology, not confidence." He personally coached her on their fabricated backstory. They had met, he dictated, through a mutual acquaintance at a charity fundraiser for medical research, a plausible link to her nursing background. Their romance was a whirlwind, a meeting of minds that transcended their different worlds. It was all nonsense, but he made her recite the details until they felt like a second skin. "I feel like a fraud," she confessed to him one evening after a particularly grueling day of lessons. They were in the Brownstones' library, a cavernous room filled with books she doubted he had ever read. He looked up from his tablet, his expression unreadable. "You are an employee fulfilling the terms of a contract. Your feelings are irrelevant to the task at hand. Focus on the objective, convincing Kaito Tanaka." His coldness was a shield, but sometimes she saw cracks in it. She noticed he never spoke of his own family. When she asked, he deflected. She saw the way he would sometimes stare out the window, a profound loneliness in his eyes that no amount of wealth could fill. He was as much a prisoner of his life as she was of this arrangement. The first test came in the form of a small dinner party at the penthouse. It was for his inner circle, his COO, a sharp woman named Jessica Thorne, his lead counsel, Robert Finch, and a few key board members. Khloe entered the room on Nathaniel's arm wearing a simple but breathtakingly expensive navy blue silk dress. The conversation was a minefield of corporate jargon and inside jokes. Khloe relied on Mrs. DeWitt's training, smiling, asking vague questions, and letting Nathaniel do most of the talking. She survived. No one seemed to suspect a thing. They saw a quiet, intelligent young woman who was clearly smitten with their boss. Jessica Thorne, however, watched her with a keen, analytical eye that reminded Khloe of Nathaniel. The biggest challenge was Penelope Astor, a statuesque, blue-blooded socialite whose family had been New York royalty for generations. Penelope had been pursuing Nathaniel for years. She appeared at a gallery opening. They attended her smile, as sharp and dazzling as the diamonds at her throat. "Nathaniel, darling," Penelope purred, gliding towards them. Her eyes swept over Khloe, a dismissive flick of a gaze that took in her dress, her hair, her very existence. And this must be the new project. "Penelope," Nathaniel said, his voice a note colder. "This is Khloe Bennett, my fiancée." "Khloe, this is Penelope Astor." "Fiancée," Penelope repeated, drawing out the word. "How sudden. I had no idea you were even looking. Tell me, Khloe, where did Nathaniel find you?" "A convent." Chloe's heart hammered, but she remembered her training. She smiled sweetly. "Actually, we met at the St. Jude benefit. I was volunteering. My passion is pediatric nursing." She subtly steered the conversation to her territory, a topic Penelope would have no interest in. Penelope's smile tightened. She had expected a bimbo, not someone who could hold her own. The encounter was brief, but it was a clear warning. The world Nathaniel inhabited was filled with predators, and she was the new, unfamiliar prey. Later that night, back in the silence of the brownstone, Khloe felt the full weight of her duplicity. She was becoming good at this. The lies were starting to feel less like lies and more like an alternate version of the truth. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was wearing a fortune in clothes. Her hair was perfectly styled, but her eyes were haunted. One evening while Nathaniel was out at a late meeting, Khloe wandered through the quiet penthouse, where she had been summoned for a final briefing before their trip to his estate. She found herself drawn to a hallway she hadn't been down before. At the end was a closed door. Curiosity gnawed at her. She pushed it open. The room was a study, but it felt different from the rest of the apartment. It was more personal. There was a faint scent of old books and lavender, and on the wall opposite the desk was a large oil-on-canvas portrait. It was of a woman. She was beautiful, with warm, laughing eyes and dark hair that fell in soft waves around her shoulders. She was wearing a simple white dress and standing in a field of wildflowers. And her face was almost identical to Khloe's. The resemblance was staggering. The same shape of the eyes, the same curve of the lips, the same bone structure. It wasn't a perfect twin, but it was close enough to steal the air from Khloe's lungs. She stepped closer, her heart turning to ice. On a small brass plaque at the bottom of the frame were 2 words: Victoria. Always. Suddenly it all made a horrific, sickening kind of sense. His intense stare in the diner, his comment that she was believable, his obsession with this arrangement. It wasn't because she was a blank slate. It was because her slate was already filled with the image of another woman. She wasn't an employee. She wasn't a partner in a transaction. She was a ghost, a stand-in for a dead woman he was still in love with. The gilded cage she was living in suddenly felt infinitely more sinister, and the bargain she had made felt far more damning than she could have ever imagined. The discovery of the portrait shattered Khloe's fragile composure. She backed out of the study, her mind reeling, a cold dread seeping into her bones. Every interaction, every compliment, every piece of instruction from Nathaniel was now cast in a sinister new light. The clothes Antoine had picked for her, did they echo a style Victoria had worn? The way Mrs. DeWitt had taught her to hold her head, was it to mimic a forgotten gesture? She felt violated, not just used. It was as if her very face, her own identity, had been stolen and repurposed to serve as a vessel for his grief. The anger from their first meeting returned, but this time it was a white-hot, righteous fury. She waited for him in the vast, sterile living room of the penthouse. The portrait of the laughing woman burned into her mind's eye. The city lights twinkled outside, oblivious to the storm brewing within. When Nathaniel finally returned just after midnight, he found her standing in the dark, a lone silhouette against the window. "Khloe, what are you doing up?" he asked, his voice laced with weariness as he loosened his tie. "I found her," Khloe said, her voice low and trembling with suppressed rage. "I found your ghost." He froze his hand still at his collar. The air in the room grew thick and heavy. He knew instantly what she meant. "The study is a private space," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And my face is my private face," she shot back, whirling to confront him. "But you seem to think you can rent it, don't you? Tell me, Nathaniel, when you look at me, who do you really see? Am I just a convenient replacement? Did you choose me from that diner? Like you were picking out a new copy of a favorite book that got worn out." Tears of anger and humiliation streamed down her face. This whole time, all the training, the clothes, was it all to make me more like her? Was it to make me into Victoria? The name hung in the air between them, a name he had never spoken to her, a name she had read on a brass plaque. The sound of it seemed to break through his formidable control. The color drained from his face, and for the first time Khloe saw not a billionaire, not a manipulator, but a man shattered by grief. He sank into a nearby chair, burying his face in his hands. The silence stretched on, broken only by Khloe's ragged breaths. Her name was Victoria Reed, he finally said, his voice muffled. She was my college sweetheart, my everything. We were going to be married. He looked up, and his grey eyes were raw with a pain so profound it silenced her anger. There was an accident. A drunk driver. 8 years ago. She was gone in an instant. He got up and walked to the window, staring out at the city that had continued to thrive while his own world had ended. For years I just worked. I built this company, this empire, because it was the only thing I could control. Everything was a problem to be solved, a variable to be managed. Emotions were a liability. He turned back to her. And then I saw you. In that diner. The resemblance. It was like being punched in the gut. For a split second I thought I was losing my mind. But it was more than that. It was the look in your eyes. Victoria had that same fight in her. That same refusal to be broken by the world. So you decided to buy me, Khloe said, her voice devoid of its earlier fire, now just hollow. It was a mistake, he admitted, his voice rough with self-loathing. A desperate, selfish, and monstrous mistake. At first I told myself it was just business. You were the right type for the role. Believable. But that was a lie, I told myself. The truth is, I saw a ghost, and I tried to bring her back to life. I tried to control the one thing I never could, the past. His confession was raw and unvarnished. It didn't excuse his actions, but it explained them. He hadn't just been manipulating her. He had been trying to medicate his own profound, unhealed wound. The clothes, the training, he continued. That was for Tanaka. It was about creating a credible public image. It was never about turning you into her. No one could ever be her. But my reason for choosing you, that was all about me. It was unforgivable, Khloe, and I am sorry. It was the first time he had shown her any genuine vulnerability. The apology coming from a man who seemed to view apologies as a weakness held a surprising weight. Khloe's anger began to recede, replaced by a complex and confusing mix of pity and understanding. He was a monster, yes, but he was a wounded one. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The contract was still in effect. The trip to his estate for the weekend with Mr. Tanaka was in 2 days. The entire charade was about to reach its climax. "The deal is still on the table," he said, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual command, though it was now tempered with a new humility. "The agreement to help your brother still stands regardless of the outcome with Tanaka. I will honor that. But I will understand if you want to walk away. You can leave right now. I won't stop you." He was giving her an out. A real one. She could take the guarantee for Noah's treatment and run from this whole sordid mess. She could go back to her life, free from the lies and the ghosts. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the lonely man behind the billions. She thought about the deal, a deal that now seemed to mean more than just money to him. It was a goal, a focus that kept the darkness at bay. And she thought about herself. She had come this far. She had learned to navigate this treacherous world. Walking away felt like quitting, like letting him and his ghosts win. "No," she said, her voice firm, surprising them both. "I made a deal. I'm going to see it through. Not for you, not for Victoria, but for me. And for my brother." She was changing the terms of the contract, not on paper, but in spirit. This was no longer just his deception. She was now a willing participant, but on her own terms, with her eyes wide open. "But from now on," she added, her gaze unwavering, "there are no more ghosts. When you're with me, you see me. Khloe Bennett. Is that understood?" Nathaniel Davenport, the man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets, simply nodded. "Understood," he said quietly. In that moment, the dynamic between them shifted irrevocably. The lie was still there, a tangible thing that would govern their actions for the next few days. But beneath it, something fragile and unexpectedly real had begun to form a shared honesty, born from the wreckage of his past and the strength of her present. The final act of their deception was staged at a glittering charity gala in the Hudson Valley. This was the finish line. Mr. Kaito Tanaka, the traditionalist patriarch, whose approval was paramount, seemed pleased. He stood with Nathaniel, a glass of champagne in hand, the multi-billion-dollar merger all but sealed with a handshake. Khloe stood by Nathaniel's side, playing her part perfectly. But across the room, she saw Nathaniel's rival, Gideon Shaw, watching them with a predatory stillness. Just as Mr. Tanaka raised his glass for a toast, Shaw made his move. He approached their group, his smile sharp and cruel. "A touching scene," he began, holding up a tablet for all to see. The screen showed 2 photos, side by side, one of a laughing, vibrant woman on Nathaniel's arm years ago, the other a recent shot of Khloe. The resemblance was devastatingly clear. "This," Shaw announced to the suddenly silent group, "is Victoria Reed, Nathaniel's deceased fiancée, and this," he gestured to Khloe, "is the waitress he hired a month ago. A broke student whose brother happens to need life-saving treatment." The air crackled with scandal. Mr. Tanaka's polite smile vanished, replaced by a hardened, inscrutable mask. Nathaniel paled, his composure shattered, his deepest grief exposed as a cheap trick. "He's not stable, Mr. Tanaka." Shaw pressed his voice, dripping with triumphant venom. "He's chasing a ghost and using this girl to do it. Is that who you want as a partner?" The attack was perfect, the truth weaponized. Khloe felt a wave of dizziness, the room threatening to collapse around her. It was over. But then, looking at Nathaniel's stricken face, something ignited within her. Not fear, but a cold, burning fury. She had not endured all this to be destroyed by a man like Gideon Shaw. She stepped forward, her movement drawing every eye in the room. "He is right," Khloe said, her voice ringing with unexpected clarity. The crowd gasped. Nathaniel stared at her in disbelief. "My name is Khloe Bennett," she said, looking directly at Mr. Tanaka. "I am a nursing student. And it is true that Mr. Davenport saw in me a resemblance to a woman he loved and tragically lost. Mr. Shaw calls that instability. I call it loyalty, the kind of profound loyalty that time cannot erase." She then turned her fiery gaze on Shaw. "But you've missed the entire point." She faced Mr. Tanaka again, her voice softening with genuine passion. "Sir, I didn't agree to this just for my brother. I did it because I saw the potential. Your company's revolutionary medical robotics, combined with Davenport Innovations' predictive AI. That partnership isn't about chasing ghosts. It's about fighting for the future. It's about creating technology that can eradicate diseases like the one my brother has. It's about saving millions of real lives." She took a breath, her honesty a palpable force in the room. That is Nathaniel Davenport's true vision. Not a return to the past, but a legacy of healing. He was just too guarded to say it himself. The silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Tanaka studied Khloe's impassioned face, then looked at the humiliated Gideon Shaw. Finally, a slow, deliberate smile spread across the old man's face. "Mr. Shaw," he said, his voice cutting and clear, "you have shown me a man's past to use as a weapon. Miss Bennett," he nodded at her with deep respect, "has shown me his character to build a future. He extended his hand to Nathaniel. "We have a deal, Mr. Davenport." As the room erupted in muted applause, Nathaniel looked at Khloe, his eyes full of awe and gratitude. In that moment, he wasn't looking at a ghost. He was looking at the woman who had just saved them both, not with the lie he had created, but with the powerful, undeniable truth of who she was. The aftermath was a quiet resolution. The contract was fulfilled, the deal was signed, and Gideon Shaw's reputation was left in tatters. True to his word, Nathaniel had the $5 million transferred to Khloe's account, and more importantly, Noah was officially accepted into the clinical trial at Johns Hopkins. The bargain was complete. Khloe was free to go to return to her life, with a future she could never have dreamed of. But something had changed for them both. The lie they had constructed had paradoxically forced a profound honesty. He had been stripped of his defenses, and she had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. 1 week later, the Rolls-Royce Phantom appeared outside her new modest apartment, one she had chosen and paid for herself near the nursing school campus. Arthur opened the door, but this time Nathaniel was the one who stepped out. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit, just jeans and a simple jacket. In his hand was not a contract, but 2 paper cups of coffee from a corner deli. "I was wondering," he said, a hesitant, genuine smile on his face, "if Khloe Bennett would be interested in having a real first date with Nathaniel Davenport." Khloe looked at the man before her, no longer a client, no longer a ghost's admirer, but someone real and flawed, and she smiled back. Their story hadn't started with a fairy tale, but with a cynical transaction. Yet somewhere in the rain, in the lies, and in the truth, they had found something more valuable than any contract could define a new beginning. So what do you think? Was Khloe right to accept the deal in the first place? And can a relationship that started with such a massive deception ever truly work? It's a story that shows us that sometimes our greatest strengths are forged in the most impossible situations. It reminds us that behind every powerful person, there's a story of love loss and vulnerability, and that true character isn't about the money you have, but the choices you make when everything is on the line. If Khloe's journey from a rain-soaked waitress to an unbreakable woman moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it, and share this video with someone who loves a story about hidden strength and unexpected love. And most importantly, if you want more dramatic stories that explore the complexities of life and love, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next. Thank you for listening.